I'm the new chairman of the committee, Councilman Isaac Gitzi-Schleifer. We are now moving on to the public safety side of tonight's hearings. We will continue with Resolution 18-0092R, the monthly council stat meeting for Baltimore City Police Department. Generally, we go through the crime trends by district. We will be doing that later on in the hearing, but being that we have a newly released crime plan, I'd like to give the police department, the commissioner, the opportunity to share with us that crime plan, and for those who are watching on TV. And so, please, Commissioner, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of this Budget Committee. This is a crime plan that we call the Crime Reduction and Departmental Transformation Plan. And it has a crime plan built into it. And then there is a second document that is the department's crime plan that talks about deployment strategies and measures of accountability, outputs versus outcomes, and community feedback, and how we deploy our resources. But this is what we put together to bring to the people of Baltimore. There's a commitment from me to make sure that we are a constitutionally fit department that treats people with dignity and respect and within the Constitution, that we are fair and impartial. I see that there are 7 core items that affect this department, and everything that we are and everything that we need falls into one of these 7 areas: crime or crime reduction, community, compliance, which means compliance with the federally mandated consent decree, culture, capacity, which is what can we do, what can't we do, connectivity, and then last, communications. And everything that we need falls into one of these 7 core areas. How do we reduce crime? How do we engage with our community? How do we become compliant with the consent decree? How do we change culture to become a 21st century police department? How do we connect with each other? How do our technologies connect with each other? How do our technologies connect with outside agencies? How do we connect with stakeholders? What is our capacity, and can we build it? How fast can we build it? What can we do? How well do we do it? And then how do we communicate messages internally to the members of our department, and how do we communicate to our stakeholders, both our electeds and the people that we all represent? And so one of the first things we did was to reorganize the department to put everybody into one of 4 bureaus. What we found was that there were parts of the department that were outside of the chain of command, which means people were working in one area and reporting to other supervisors or reporting to multiple supervisors. And those entities were not communicating, collaborating, and there's another word, I'm forgetting it at the moment. But anyway, we want to make sure that everybody reports to one supervisor, everybody was within one chain of command. We've now created 4 bureaus headed by 4 deputy commissioners. The point of that was so that no one deputy commissioner could override another entity. For example, if there's a disciplinary issue, the deputy commissioner of operations or another deputy commissioner could not override a disciplinary decision, or for consent decree compliance, no one could override a consent decree mandate because they represent me and or the judge that oversees our federally mandated consent decree. And so now we have aligned the department where everybody reports to one supervisor, and the span of control was right sized, meaning the amount of people reporting to any one supervisor has been aligned. We found a number of people, especially in our higher ranking positions, had very unequitable spans of control. Some had hundreds and or thousands, some only had a few. And then we found that there were some people who didn't have the right skill set for the position they were holding. We have now realigned the department into those 4 bureaus where we fixed the chain of command, the unity of command, and the span of control. Here are the core areas that all working together lead to crime reduction. Like I said earlier, one of the main goals to get to crime reduction is response time, and we have not had a response time goal in the department, and we do now. Enhancing and leveraging technology, improving solve rates for open investigative cases, making sure that we maximize all the resources that are available to us. How do we deploy people to deter and displace crime? Using smart deployment strategies and high levels of community engagement. How do we encourage witness protection, but that only comes with building strong relationships and leveraging community support. Then we want to make sure we leverage technology and smart deployments to reduce officer burden so that we can free up officer time, so that we can be more visible to deter more crime. Here's one thing you'll see in the next crime plan, which we talk about right now. It's data-driven crime suppression strategies. These are what we now call micro zones, which are small zones that make up 5% of the geography for the entire city. The crimes that we used and the data from those crimes are homicides, non-fatal shootings, and armed robberies. We found that in those three crimes, they make up only 5% of the geography, but that accounts for 33% of all gun violence from those three crimes. And so now we have a deployment strategy that tells us where those crimes are occurring, and actually what days of week and times of day they're occurring, so we can now use smart deployment strategies to be more crime-centric as opposed to geography-centric. Then we want to have the performance goal that you see at the bottom of having 40 minutes of occupied time, which is handling the citizens' concerns, and then 20 minutes of free time on every hour so that we can engage in high levels of community engagement. So that our 60% of the 8-hour day being occupied by citizens' calls and 40% of the workday free to engage in community activities and community policing initiatives, thereby building better relationships so that we can get to a 10-minute or less response time goal, which we now have for the very first time, that we will be able to improve on. We can't possibly know how many officers we need until we first know how fast we want to get to a citizen's crime. Now we have this response time goal that we can work towards. One of the things we've already started is, which is a national best practice, is returning detectives back to the districts. And because we were short and because we remain short, and we moved to a different strategy and deployment for patrol and a different schedule, we moved detectives into a centralized deployment where they were working out of one place but handling all the crimes around the city, that is non-fatal shootings and or robberies. We have returned those shooting detectives and the robbery detectives back to the districts so that they can be aligned and work side by side with the officers who are taking the initial reports, and to be aligned with the community policing philosophy where the detectives are in the district because they understand and can quickly identify the bad actors that are in those districts. Then to be a force multiplier and to account for our manpower shortage, we want to civilianize and professionalize our department. You've heard me say this many times about bringing in professional staff to do the professional staff work that we over time have had police officers to do. All of the administrative burdens that you see, many of them are outlined in some of the job descriptions listed here in the bottom. We want to move those officers back into the field and fill those positions with professional staff. And I want to thank you for funding the 62 positions that we have. And we are now working to identify, to create a work list and to identify people and conduct those interviews to make those hires, to put people in a number of these positions. And we think there are far more than that that we'll be able to talk about going forward in the future. This really allows police officers to do what we joined the police department to do. That's to come here and be police officers and to protect and serve. This next slide talks about crime analytics, which is what we call criminal social networking, which allows us to understand the relationships through data analysts of how people are related to other people, places, times, days, events, and things, and how they are all interrelated. And through crime analytics with trained crime analysts, we can now identify people who are members of gangs, but identify people who are tied to other people and all types of days and events and things, which becomes a great evidentiary value in court and allows us to really close cases to prove how we know these people are gang-related and or related to other criminal activity. This is another way of reducing crime by actually by using the science and the analysis of how people and things and places are related. But that brings us to our redesign of CompStat. It's all about accountability-driven leadership. And in accountability-driven leadership, we're going to redesign our CompStat to move away from just accounting for crime and the deployment to crime to looking at the 360-degree command performance of our commanders. And so what you will see is all of these things highlighted at the bottom. These are the things we really want to assess the performance of our commanders on. So it's one thing to move from the original CompStat model of identifying crime, where it is and when it's happening, and how to deploy to it, to understand how our commanders understand how to plan, how to staff, how to budget, how to allocate resources, how to deal with crisis intervention, citizens complaint, community engagement, and how it all relates to the total command performance. And that's where we're going with the a redesign of our CompStat. This next slide talks about how we leverage relationships with our local, state, and federal partners and make sure all of us have skin in the game to make sure that we're not operating in silos, but we're coordinating, consolidating, collaborating, and communicating so that all of us are on the same page and there's no overlap in duties and no duplicative work done by other agencies, and that we're all working on the same team to accomplish the goals, which is crime reduction here in the city of Baltimore. And then we've been allowed to enter in what's called the National Public Safety Partnership, which Baltimore has applied for several years in a row and was denied. This year we were approved to get in. It is a 3-year program that provides technical assistance from the federal government under the United States Attorney General's office, and 10 cities are in at a time. 3 come out, 3 go in. It's a 3-year program, and it allows us to have technical assistance from experts from around the country to help us in redesigning CompStat and building great crime analysis, in redesigning how we deploy, and all of the technical assistance from its experts are available to us to come here or to bring us to them at the cost of the federal government. And this is a great program. New Orleans was in it for 3 years, and now they've allowed Baltimore to be in it. And it really compels our federal partners to have skin in the game, where they're not necessarily reporting their work to me, but they're actually reporting to the Attorney General. So they're kind of compelled to make this work, and that's the beauty of being in this partnership. Then we want to make sure we enhance the quality of our criminal cases, and this is an agreement that I worked out with our state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, that we would do weekly crime case reviews for 3 different types of cases: homicides, non-fatal shootings, and armed robberies, where we either have an arrested subject or a person who is a suspect or a person of interest who we could potentially be arresting as a person in one of these crimes. Bringing those cases to them once a week so that they're not telling us how to investigate, but really helping us produce the best possible quality product to turn over to them to accomplish 3 things. It minimizes the amount of refusals that could come from the state's attorney because we did a poor job in either investigating or interviewing and interrogating. Plea bargain down because the case is not winnable, and or there's some flaw in our investigation, and or dismissals from court because of one of those things. And this is the agreement that we have to strengthen our cases on the front end. And then we want to move into what we had here once before, but we really want to strengthen it. It's called GVRS, the Group Violence Reduction Strategy. It's under the Focused Deterrence Crime Fighting Model, where we use crime analysis to identify the small subset of individuals committing the most violence, either as individuals and or groups and gangs. We want to go back to the call-ins, but we want to make sure that those call-ins are effective and that we're calling in the right impact players who can carry the message that we will help you if you let us, but we will absolutely stop you if you make us. And we're going back to the call-in. But that brings us to this comprehensive violence reduction strategy, where we are not actually running it from the police department, but a partner in it, because it focuses on all of the tangible things that are not police-related, like prevention, intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry, where those things are happening and the work is being done in Baltimore, but by and large in silos, where there's no collaboration, communication, and coordination. We want to bring that under one hub and one umbrella where we can create performance metrics and know the capacity in each one of these disciplines at all times, so that enforcement is only one component of it, but this is the true way to reduce crime. And other cities have demonstrated this: New Orleans, Oakland, Philadelphia, and a number of other cities who continue to use this. We want to make sure that we are leveraging the best practices and implementing that here in Baltimore, where enforcement is one, and we would do our part to make our department a great department, but it does rely on a number of stakeholders to improve the social ills of the community that are the root causes for crime. And we have to address why people are actually committing the crime and solve for that as well. But it talks about prevention, investments in prevention, and diversion, whether from the police department, the state's attorney, and or a combination. These are just a couple of examples through ROCA and through Safe Streets, who are already doing some of the work. There are others. We want to make sure that it's all coordinated and collaborated, and there's great communication between all of them and all of us all the time at the same time. Then you have our lead, our law enforcement assisted diversion, which we are working to create strategies to reduce juvenile incarceration and reduce officer burden by eliminating the things that are non-harmful and only focusing on the violent crime and making sure people don't graduate from minor crime to more violent crime. And I believe this is the way we can be more effective, be more efficient, and create more free time for our officers. But it does require investment into a number of these things, both outside of our department and inside of our department. Then finally, rehabilitation, which is the main thing here in our city, and reentry, making sure that people, number one, have the skills and jobs that they need to be successful so that there's no recidivism and they're not returning back to communities where they committed crimes that caused them pain in the first place. All of this is being coordinated between our director from the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice and me. While I may be the champion, it will live in that office, and we will work together to champion our comprehensive violence reduction strategy. Then, of course, there's transformation through our department through the consent decree, a federally mandated consent decree, meaning we must transform our department in 18 core areas broken down in 510 paragraphs, are action items that must be improved upon, that the Department of Justice's investigation said there were what they call unconstitutional patterns and practices of policing. We're well underway in year 2 of that consent decree. We met 2 weeks ago in federal court with Judge Berdar, who talked about the progress that we're making. Certainly there is a long way to go, but certainly our department is embracing this and we're moving forward. We believe we're having success and we look forward to future and greater success. You hear me talk about this a lot, burden reductions. How do we reduce burdens and free up officer time? Because we acknowledge we're short of officers, we need more, but the next best thing to bringing on more officers, which we are doing through our recruitment and retention, is reducing the workload for the current officers. We want to move our department into a digital environment and away from a paper environment. From handwriting police reports to typing them in the cars, typing our warrants from our computers, whether in the cars or in the stations, sending them directly to a judge who could read them, sign them, and send them back to us electronically. Moving into a digital environment where we are identifying people who we come into contact with through hotspot policing stops and our high levels of community engagement, so that that information exists in a database that can be audited and extrapolated digitally as opposed to looking through papers to conduct those audits. And then we heard me talk about this earlier, reducing the amount of calls we go on that are not police related or police centric. But this gives us the ability to move totally into a digital environment for patrol, for detectives to have a case management system that gives us alerts when cases are delinquent and gives interventions and responses on the part of supervisors to know what actions to take when we do that. That doesn't exist now. That's what we get out of this new digital environment, which we will buy as soon as we receive the funds to buy it. Moving to things like a false alarm program or the reductions of false alarms. Many of the calls we go on are not burglaries. They're actually false alarms being tripped by either a homeowner or a business, and that occupies a lot of our time. If we could reduce the amount of calls we go on that are false alarms, we could free up time to get to that call response time goal and that occupied versus unoccupied time goal that we want to have for our department. Then we want to move to more telephone reporting or alternative police reporting and build a far more robust web-based reporting where we can move the majority of our property crimes to a web-based reporting system, freeing up time. This is a chart from the Garner report that illustrates where we are with technology, what we need, and the timelines we think we should be on to accomplish those goals of acquiring that technology and implementing it into our police department. It absolutely gives benefit to the administrative process, to the operations process, and to the accountability process, even with internal affairs, how to track internal affairs cases from the moment a complaint's filed to the moment a disposition is given, all the way to discipline being carried out. Then we want to move into micro-community policing plans, which are much like the micro plans for police deployment. In micro-community policing plans, it allows community members to collaborate with district commanders to make sure that they design together in collaboration the kind of community policing initiatives that are centric to that district. Because what one district may need may be very different than what another district needs or the people desire in that district. And this gives a lot of autonomy and authority to the members of that community to collaborate with the commander to design its own community policing strategy. That, my members of the council, is coming. And then we will train not just the members of our department, but members of the community how to do this, how to engage with each other, and how to bring about and effectuate this level of change so that we can bring about micro-community policing plans. But that means we have to go to every officer as a community policing officer and not just the 1, 2, or 3 that are assigned to a district, which gives the implication that they do community policing and everybody else does not. We want to make sure that in this philosophy, everybody's a community policing officer. So we are committed to de-escalation, we are committed to constitutional policing, all of the things, civil rights and officer wellness and safety. All of that is being taught at our academy right now because community policing is our core function and it is the core value that we build all the other training upon. You already heard us talk about our renewed focus on recruitment and retention, which are the same, because if you ask any officer who's here, the one thing they want more than anything else is more police officers. And so we're now working to make sure as we recruit, we want to make sure that we understand how our process is, make it as robust and efficient as we possibly can through our new CompStat model, where we CompStat every part of the recruitment process to make sure we're finding the right people and finding the bottlenecks and slowdowns within the process to correct them as fast as we can. Then it is about maintaining the correct cycle of academy classes. So as we built capacity in the recruitment team, we had to build capacity in the academy to be able to train the people that are coming in when the floodgates open. So now we know now how to schedule a continuous cycle of academy classes to bring about the same number of people in, where we can go up to about 50 people per class if we can bring them in fast enough, bringing in 4 to 5 to 6 classes a year and graduating 3 a year. It's about a 34-week academy. We can be on a timeline almost to the day to know when we start a class and when we graduate a class and how many people we can bring through the system in a calendar year. These are just a couple of shots from our recruitment campaign to talk about how we attract more women and minorities into the department from Baltimore to live and work in Baltimore, to include cadets, people from the age of 18 but not yet 21, to create a pipeline of employment by nurturing them and making sure they're ready for a police academy when they turn 20. And then obviously the retention is about making sure the working conditions in our department are improved through improving our police stations, our detective units, our fleet, our equipment, all of the things that make this a good place to be and a good place to come. And those improvements really are what retention is all about. It's about working conditions, it's about upward mobility and promotions in the organization, fairness and equity, and then pay becomes the fourth issue. But this is the number one issue: people stay or leave in an organization, and we're committed to making sure through both public and private help, we're increasing our capacity by improving our working conditions. It's all about officer wellness and making sure we're physically and mentally fit to be on this job. And so we really have a great concern to make sure our people are good and ready to serve at the highest level, not just at the beginning of the shift, but at the end of the shift. And so there's a great focus on officer wellness. Then about professional development. How do we create leaders of the future? How do we have succession planning and train leaders to take over? And that's what we're focusing on. Lieutenant Colonel Briscoe is our most recent graduate from our FBI National Academy, which is a 10-week command level program. There are others who we want to get into that program. There is a 2-year waiting list, but we're working to identify the next set of candidates for that. But there are other programs that are in the private sector that we're working to send. I sent 6 of our command staff members to a 3-week program at Boston University this year. 2 of them are right here with me today. Lieutenant Colonel Herzog and Colonel Worley both attended the Senior Management Institute for Police and have been transformed. Their eyes have been opened and enlightened to all the wonderful things of best practices in policing and management practices in the business sector. We hope to get our entire command staff trained, but we also want to work to make sure we train supervisors at every level to make sure that we can create professional development from sergeants all the way up to our most senior positions. And lastly, we want to bring a program that we started in New Orleans to Baltimore called EPIC, or Ethical Policing is Courageous, which is a peer intervention program that teaches us how to institute value and loyalty on the front end as opposed to distributing loyalty on the back end after a bad thing has happened. This is about saving careers and preventing our colleagues from making the bad mistakes that cost them their careers and cause us to have to make bad decisions to cover for them, but rather preventing those bad acts from ever happening. That's coming to Baltimore. We think that's going to be a huge success. And that concludes the 5-year strategic vision and transformational plan for the police department. We do talk about in the actual crime plan the creation of the micro zones, which I talked about earlier, but it's a new shift in our deployment strategy to focus on when crimes are occurring and where they're occurring, and using smart data to make us deployed to that, and then holding supervisors accountable to ensure that that's actually happening. High levels of community engagement, high levels of police enforcement when we see violations occurring, but making sure we're in the places where we know crimes have been occurring over a 5-year period, which tells us where the zones are, and then over a 6-month period telling us when the crimes occur by day, by night. And so with that, I will open it up to any questions we may have, and thank you for indulging me for a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Before I get into my thoughts and some questions, I'd like to first give the first question opportunity to my Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great job so far leading your first hearing. We're off to a great start. I had a question about the civilianization. You indicated 62 positions have been funded for fiscal year 20. What is the goal for civilianization of the department, and where are we year to date on actually filling those positions? I'm
gonna let my deputy commissioner jump in and answer a little bit of that. But before he does, the goal is to identify all the positions that are critical positions that have to remain. Certainly, there's an ability to collapse and consolidate some positions. There's an ability to eliminate some positions, but for those that are critical, where the work must be done or it begins to be harmful, to civilianize those positions while working to consolidate and collapse the other positions, and then to hire the professional staff. We're already underway creating a job registry and identifying potential candidates, and then now in the process of working to conduct interviews to effectuate the actual hires.
Mr. Vice Chairman, with regard to the 62 positions, 13 of them have been hired. Most of them are in the crime lab. The rest are spread out mostly in the admin bureau, so we're about 25% filled. And we are actively working with DHR right now, having them post it, creating the registry. One thing I will say is that with civilianization, it is one of the fastest ways for us to increase our staffing. Right. But one thing that a lot of people, and myself included, I always had in my head that when you do you have someone come into a civilian position, you immediately put an officer out on the street. It's not that quick. There is a transition period where there is cross-training, essentially.
So the goal for the year is to fill the full 62 positions?
Absolutely.
Mr. Vice Chairman, one of the things that our staffing plan is doing as well is identifying additional opportunities for civilianization beyond the 62. So we want to make sure that we're basing that on that robust analysis so that we can identify those additional, because I do believe, and the Commissioner does believe, that there are additional opportunities beyond the 62. And once we have that formalized plan from the consultants, we'll be able to share that with the council and be able to incorporate it probably in a phased approach over time as would be part of the FY 2021 or FY 2022 budgets.
Got it. Okay. The second question I had, are we doing one?
The Vice Chair, do what you got.
All right, cool, man. Thank you. For call-ins, a few things I saw missing. I see that there is a representative from MOCJ, and I guess that would be Director Martin in the call-ins. Not sure if it's appropriate to have Roca and Safe Streets there, but I guess having the director there may make sense for that setting. But I would also add that if you're really trying to get at sort of root causes of violence, one of the things I constantly hear from both my constituents, some of which are in and out of this life, is housing instability. I see that there is a focus on job and job training, job readiness. That's great. A lot of these guys are also couch surfing, in and out of homeless, living out of cars, and I think it would be a great addition to add homeless services or housing to that call-in as just another element to that conversation. And maybe you thought of it, maybe I see the director coming up, so just something I saw there.
I absolutely agree with you that housing is a key component, because a number of individuals want help and want a pathway out. Part of the pathway out is a place to live and sometimes where they live. Yeah.
And thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. So we are working right now to actually put together a whole ecosystem of resources so that when we make the offer of help, that we can actually give them the help that we need. I stood up simply because one of the things that we've recently discovered is that we have several rapid housing rehousing vouchers for folks that are returning. And so we're looking for things like that to continue to expand upon so that there's not this wait time, that actually when they decide to turn their lives around, that there are resources that are waiting for them right there, and then that obviously was spread throughout the rest of the community.
Okay. And the reason that came to mind, just to highlight one of the things I learned recently, I had an opportunity to meet with the hospital responders at Sinai Hospital, I think that was Monday. And one of the things that they mentioned offering was rapid rehousing, even in the form of a hotel for a couple days until they could figure out something, assistance with a security deposit, I mean, anything to prevent further violence and retribution. Are those sort of elements being included? And I guess obviously there's like a need to grow this out via budgetarily. I saw dollar signs when I saw this as well. But I think it's a pretty good idea. And if you could just also just expound on, I guess, some of the other best practices you're pulling in.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we are looking at is what has worked in other cities and what hadn't worked here. And one of the issues was when we had offered this before, it was a phone number or, you know, a kind of a cold call. What we're working on right now is actually creating an ecosystem, because what we've determined in the city is while we have a lot of folks that are perpetrators and or victims of violence, there is not a robust programmatic response, because, you know, members of this council have even worked on making sure that there were allowances for people who are returning home or have had criminal backgrounds. So we are having very robust, direct conversations, and we're not saying we just need services. Let's just have a cadre of services and a list of services to give to people. We're saying that we have talked to people with lived experiences. We know what they need. We've talked to other cities to see what evidence-based practices work, and we've also talked to folks that we know that we can't talk to people about turning their lives around and fixing those things if they're being evicted from their houses, if light bills are not being paid. The other thing that we have looked at is that what's worked in other cities and what worked in New Orleans was this intensive case management. But one of the things that we're adding in Baltimore City, and many of the members of the council know that even if you have a case manager, you still got to get to that case manager. You may wake up in the morning worried about if you can feed yourself that day, and you're not worried about getting over there for services. So we are looking to incorporate either Safe Streets or people like Safe Streets that are in the community that know these folks, to actually help them get to the services that they need. We're also trying to make it such that on the night of the call-in, you have, you know, immediately somebody that is assigned to you, that is helping you through the process, that can come to your home the very next day. We are really enforcing almost kind of like that ROCA and Safe Streets approach, where we are pursuing you so that we can save your life. And so all of that, I'm about 85% finished with my plan, and when I get done, I'll definitely make sure to present it to you all. But all of that is being taken into consideration, because we know that in order for a program like this to succeed, we have to be good on our word, whether that's, you know, incarceration or providing the services. So we're really working on that.
Thank you.
Council President Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I was just simply asking if we had a timeline for when we want to identify all of the civilian positions that we think, positions that we can civilianize. I think that Deputy Commissioner Gillis answered that and said it's going to go along with the staffing study, so thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, Commissioner, thank you for this crime plan. Normally, it was customary for the Chair of Public Safety Committee for the past few years to ask, where's the crime plan? But we now have a crime plan, so I won't ask you that question. But what I will ask you is that if we can, you know, help set some parameters today about expectations that we should have and the citizens of Baltimore should have. This is a 5-year plan, but we want to make sure that between oversight hearings that this plan is being implemented. Implementation is just as important as the plan. And so looking forward from today to the next hearing, what type of things can we expect to see implemented? I know in the beginning you were talking about a lot of personnel changes and organizational shift. We see there's still one key position at the top of the chart that has yet to be filled. So that's obviously important in moving forward. What kind of things could we expect to see between now and the next hearing?
Thank you for that. One, that key position, the hire is imminent, and so in the very near future, we will be announcing that. I think the thing that you'll start seeing more than anything, we've already started with moving detectives back to districts. In the last week, we identified a number of detectives to add to that, and so we have increased the size of the detective units in the district and downsized some of the detectives in our criminal investigations division. We've added 6 more detectives to our homicide, and a supervisor to our homicide unit. We've added more shooting and robbery detectives to districts because we found other people in other units, and we were trying to be effective and efficient and make sure we balance off those resources. You'll see more, I think the citizens will see more community engagement, higher levels of community engagement, because not only is that the goal, but we're actually holding ourselves, our officers, our supervisors accountable to make sure that that is actually happening, and we want to get community feedback from that to make sure it's working. Then measuring that against whether or not the patrol strategy into the micro zones with the community engagement and the hotspot policing is actually deterring crime and or displacing crime. I think it's a little early to tell. Early signs show some level of displacement, but it's kind of early to tell. So I think between now and then, we can show the implementation of some things that are already being done with becoming more efficient in our police department. We've already created now a different way of utilizing the officers who are injured in some capacity, whether minor or major injuries, and we're moving all of them to one class code instead of having all of them assigned to the parent district and or division. All of the people who are classified as injured, whether major injuries or minor injuries, are will be under one supervisory chain, so we can manage that, so we can create performance metrics to help get those people back to work as fast as they can possibly heal and become whole. That's already happening, and as we get funds allocated to us that we want to buy and or build technological advances, we'll be able to show you through putting out RFPs and how we want to move forward with acquisitions of certain technology and equipment and how the implementation of that works. And we'll be able to talk to you and to our citizens about whether or not deployment strategies will work and the implementation of some of the technology implementations, how that's working, and are we really reducing the amount of calls we go on? Are we really moving more of our calls to web-based reporting? What's the percentage week by week or month by month? How do we socialize that? And then quarterly and biannually and perhaps annually have a report how much work we have reduced in call volume and workload we reduced versus how many people we actually came in and how many people we retain. Then we deal with crime reduction and how are we doing with that in consent decree compliance as well. So I think over time we'll be happy to come back and report out on how fast we implement some of the things you heard us talk about and then how fast they caught traction and begin to bear fruit.
Right, because I mean, our goal is to see that reduction of crime continue in not just the categories it has been, but really across the board in all categories, and to just continue month over month, see that the downward shift. But I understand that there will be a transition period between now and then. The next question I would have is, has the weekly, I see you didn't touch on it before, has the weekly meetings with the state's attorney's office started yet?
That has not started yet. That's an agreement that we have. It does require a crime data analyst to be hired working at her office. I believe that analyst is going to be hired out of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice so that there's a reporting system to the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, but the person will work at the state's attorney's office to help facilitate those meetings and then mine and comb the data to present to us on where we need to make improvements with homicides, non-fatal shootings, and robbery cases, and or where those cases get tracked throughout the criminal justice system so that we're informed about that at every level.
So can we, is it too soon to expect that person to be in place before the next hearing? Next month?
So we did receive a job description for that person. We had conversations about the requirements for that job and the type of person that we need. The chief of staff for the mayor is identifying funds right now to fund that position. So while things are moving, I'm not sure that somebody would be hired by the time that we have the next hearing, but it is something that we're working on to get done expeditiously.
All right, so no later than the following one, then, we can expect that?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
I mean, funding shouldn't be a barrier. It's not, you know, it's one single person, but obviously what that person's aiming to accomplish is worth, you know, is worth any cost. So.
And that's actually what we have to make sure, because, I mean, there's been representations made that data is not in the best shape, and that there are not actually systems to review what happens after a disposition of a case and all. So we've just got to make sure that we get the right person in there to do this job. But yeah, the funding, I think, is not going to be the issue.
Thank you. Council President.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Martin. As you know, this is something that we started work on in the wintertime, way before I was council president, so I'm glad that we were able to work as a team to get it together. But this is really for Mr. Blindy. There is no more important thing when it comes to figuring out what's actually going on out on the streets of Baltimore than this person, because it's impossible for the police commissioner to know the mistakes that his officers are routinely making if he's not able to see why cases are null pros, or how many of them are null prosecuted because there was an error on his side. Likewise, the same exists for the state's attorney. So we have to make this happen as soon as humanly possible. I don't want to spend anybody else's budget other than mine, but I think that there are several pots of funds that we can look at. But also for Director Martin, I think that it would be very, very important of us to make sure that we also talk to the individuals that were doing this on a trial basis for the state's attorney from Johns Hopkins, because if we know they know the systems, and maybe one of them are able to come over to us full time, or we can steal them from Dr. Webster. Sorry, Dr. Webster, if you're watching this hearing. But I think that we have to have this in order for us to have a department that operates in the way that we want it to, and also to prevent what hasn't happened with this commissioner and this state's attorney. I wouldn't expect that it will, but it's happened so many times in the past where the commissioner and the state's attorney and the courts are in this back and forth with each other about whose fault it is that someone who had some gun crimes in their background was back out on the street, when the reality is that no one really knows. So we have to make this happen as quickly as humanly possible so that we can have the data, so that we can change the policies, change the practices, and the actions out on the street so that people can get some relief.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first of all, we hear you, and I'm certain the mayor agrees, and I don't want to speak for the police commissioner or for Director Martin, but I can tell you that was referenced in the budget hearing, that letter that was submitted by the August 1st deadline to the budget chairs and to the governor, that it was very important, on the mayor's letterhead had the signatures of the key players. They all reviewed it. They all submitted it. It was signed by the mayor, by the police commissioner, by Director Martin, and by State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby. So I'm certain that this understanding that we have to get this right, and these conversations are happening because the mayor's aware and all four parties are aware. But I will take your comments back to the mayor, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then once that's done, we should probably have another person that handles the next step, which is the state's attorney's office to the judges, to track those cases as well as what's happening once cases are being prosecuted, to then the decisions that are being made in the courtroom. So that's for a different time. Anybody else have any questions before we move into the district by district numbers?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you,
if we
sir.
can move into the district by district crime stats.
All right, good evening, everyone. Basically, we're going to start with the citywide numbers. The homicides year to date are up 19%. Shootings are up 32%, and the total it's up, gun-related, is up 28%. The rapes are down 28%, robberies down 5%, aggravated assaults are up 1%, burglaries down 14%, auto thefts are down 6%. over year-to-date, we're down 2% in violent crime, down 4% in property crime, and down 4% in total Part 1. But when you look at the EXIM for this week, you'll see on the 7-day, a lot of green, which means that we had a pretty decent week, and hopefully we can carry that over to the 28-day and continue it along. Moving to the Central, the Central is down 69% in homicides, up 52% in non-fatal shootings, up 10% in gun-related incidents. Rapes are down 15%, robberies up 16%, aggravated assaults down 7%, burglaries are even, auto thefts down 1%, total Part 1 is down 2%, violent crime is up 2%, and property crime is down 4%. Southeast, homicides are up 150%, non-fatal shootings are up 109%, gun-related crime is up 113%, rapes are down 25%, robberies down 16%, aggravated assaults are up 3%, burglaries are up 12%, auto thefts up 13%, and total violent crime is down 7%, property crime is up 1%, and total Part 1 is down 2%. For the Eastern, you have 27% increase in homicides, 68% increase in non-fatal shootings, 54% increase in gun-related crime, 30% decrease in rapes, robberies are even, aggravated assaults are up 15%, burglaries are down 17%, auto thefts down 8%, total violent crime is up 8%, property crime is down 14%, and total Part 1 crime in the Eastern is down 6%. To the Northeast, homicides are even, non-fatal shootings are up 9%, gun-related is up 14%, rapes are down 61%, robberies are down 13%, ag assaults up 2%, burglaries down 19%, auto thefts down 9%, violent crime is down 8%, property crime down 7%, and total Part 1 is down 7%. Northern District, homicides down 7%, non-fatal shootings down 16%, total gun-related is down 13%, rapes are up 6%, robberies down 8%, ag assaults up 1%, burglaries down 37%, auto thefts up 4%, total violent crime is down 4%, property crime is down 5%, and total Part 1 is down 4%. Moving to the Northwest, homicides are up 86%, non-fatal shootings up 17%, gun-related crime is up 33%, rapes up 12%, robberies down 6%, aggravated assault up 7%, burglaries down 15%, auto thefts down 16%, total violent crime is up 3%, property crime is down 5%, and total Part 1 is down 3%. Western District, 52% increase in homicides, 57% increase in non-fatal shootings. Gun-related crime is up 53%. Rapes down 35%, robberies up 7%, aggravated assaults up 1%, burglaries down 22%, auto theft up 10%, total violent crime is up 4%, total property down 1%, total Part 1 is up 2%. I'm sorry, it's up 1%, down 2%. Homicides in the Southwest are up 63%. Non-fatal shootings are down 4%. Gun-related crimes are up 15%. Rapes down 34%. Robberies up 15%. Aggravated assaults down 2%. Burglaries down 4%. Auto thefts down 6%. Total violent crime is up 4%. Property crime is up 3%, and total Part 1 is up 4%. Southern District down 52% in homicides, down 5% in non-fatal shootings, down 23% in gun-related crime, down 37% in rapes, down 19% in robberies, down 10% in ag assaults, down 15% in burglaries, down 25% in auto thefts. Total violent crime is down 16%, property crime is down 12%, and total Part 1 is down 14%.
Thank you. Council President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colonel, I want to start with the Northwest because they have the largest jump. Can you tell us what are we seeing out there? So in a 28-day, they have a 700% increase in homicides for the Northwest District. I know we had the incident at Park Heights and Cold Spring the other day. What kind of intel are we getting in? And also, are we we putting hands on the people that we need to see? I don't know. I have to look at the gun arrests for Northwest to see where they are year to date, because we're seeing a big increase in homicides and non-fatal shootings both in that district. I would hope that we're also making significant gun arrests in that district to try to provide some relief. But just tell us what we think is happening there, because that's a big jump from 14 to 26 from one year to the next.
Basically, just recently, they've hit a really tough spot where they've had several homicides and several non-fatal shootings. Several of them were related to robberies that have gone bad, and then like just the one they had the other day that's just targeted. The guy standing out talking on his cell phone. Two guys come around the corner, shoot him, and take off running. So they're coming up close range and they're shooting the target and they're taking off. So we've got some intel in it. We really don't have a ton on a lot of the cases, but several of them are related to robberies and up close and personal incidents.
So just to follow up on that, just because, as you know, because I often text you about the corner of Cold Spring and Park Heights, and it's where I grew up and spent most of my life. But it seems that a lot of it is sent around there and around Boardman Avenue. Now, I know historically those have been two different crews, right? So even though they're right next to each other, Cold Spring and Park Heights is one crew, Boardman and Reisterstown is another. Is that still what's existing today, or are we still seeing the feud between the two?
Yeah, we still see that same type of feud, even though we have foot officers in the area. We had a homicide about a month ago. The foot officer was walking foot and went into the store, and they shot an individual right around the corner from where, like 50 feet from where the foot officer was. So they're waiting, and they know when we're there, and as we move along, or as we even do a business check that quickly, they were just waiting for the opportunity to take advantage of it.
And so just real quickly going back, so I looked at them looking at their gun arrests. So the gun arrests in Northwest are down 19%. Do we think that we're not touching the right people, or they're getting hip to what we're doing as far as making sure that, the methods that we're using to get guns from them? What do we think is happening with the individuals around them?
What's happening a lot throughout the city is that the suspects are no longer carrying the weapons on them quite as much. They're either stashing them in tire wells. Tire wells are places where they'll hide them, or we'll find them in houses, or they're being transported in cars. We've got a lot of incidents where they're pulling up in a vehicle, shooting from the vehicle and taking off. So it's almost impossible unless we stop the car on the way there or on the way back. But the officers have caught several of them leaving the scenes of incidents. And basically, a lot of it is being transported through through cars.
So that's actually a question for both of you and the commissioner. Are you where you need to be as far as LPRs and the ability to have them out on the street, and what do you need from us in order to help push that? Because I think that my guess is that most of these, if not all of these vehicles that are being used, no one's dumb enough to do a shooting out of their own car, right? They're probably being done from a car that's stolen. If we were able to have more LPRs, and also when we allow officers the time to be more free to do stops based off stolen autos, and then also where are we, but also how are we still using state police and the other folks to have those resources as well? Because I think that one of the things that the commissioner and I have spoken about on several occasions, that if we were able to have those resources to do more traffic, I think that we can actually prevent more crime.
Yes, well, we've got 20 LPR cars out now, 20 in existence, 5 in the eastern, 5 in the western, and we've got them the other ones spread throughout the districts. But as you know, that's only 2 in those districts, so we could definitely use a lot more LPR cars out on the street. So just that fact, and we do use them to basically, when we have a shooting, they basically crisscross those streets to get the tag readers and to see if we can follow up on any vehicles. But only having 2 in a district and only having 5 in the eastern and the western, we could definitely use a lot more cars. Yes. And that's an investigative tool. So when they go through, the detectives go back and pull all the information that the tag readers pick up. So if we get a description of a vehicle, we go back and look for the vehicle, especially if we get a tag number. We can go back and research the tag number and see when the last LPR hit was, or if when we get a carjacking, same thing, we can track the car.
Ms. Chief?
I wanted to be able to provide, sir, an update on your request having to do with the analyst as it related to the state's attorney's office. I just got off the phone with the mayor's office. They actually have created that job position and have identified a person to put into that position.
There we
So
go.
so by the time the next monthly meeting happens, that person should be onboarded. So
Thank you.
that's been taken care of, and that way we can proceed forward with the commissioner's plan to have those weekly call-ins and review for the status of those violent crime cases.
And that's the kind of speed that we'd like everything done.
Us too. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Colonel and Mr. Commissioner, so what is prohibiting us from getting more LPRs? Is that something that we need to handle on our end? Is that advocacy from the council? What do we need to do in order to get more people trained on using them and get them out on the street?
There are two kinds of LPRs. They're the mobile LPRs,
Yep.
and they're the fixed LPRs. I think both just will require funding to be able to get them, and then the technological infrastructure to support the fixed LPR. So in New Orleans, we had crime cameras and we had LPRs that were fixed in addition to the mobile ones. Those work really good, but they're really an investigative tool, like the Colonel said, for investigations. It's not necessarily something that prevents the bad act, but rather serves as an investigative tool to go back and conduct follow-up investigation. Now, as culture shifts and we begin to use that to identify people and we begin to make good quality cases that end in conviction, the culture shifts, then it becomes a deterrent factor. But I think we have to think about, as we overlay crime cameras across the city, how we think about now LPRs in some of those locations or in similar locations that capture people coming into and out of neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up, if we can let you guys let us know like what you need as far as those, and
Yes.
and see if we can figure out creative ways to get you to fund them, because I think it's something that we need. We have to have these kind of things.
Yes, sir.
My next question, Colonel, is about carjackings. Carjackings they're on the rise citywide. They're up 17% year to date. What trends are we seeing? My guess is that this is still driven a lot by young people who are basically carjacking people in order to sell people who are using them in other crimes. Is that still the trend that we're seeing?
Good evening. Yes, it is still the trend that we're seeing. We're seeing actually.
Hold for 1 second, Lieutenant Colonel. I don't think your mic is on. Tap that. Tap your mic. Just tap it. No, it's not on.
Good evening.
There we go. And identify yourself for the record the first time you spoke.
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel John Herzog from CID. Good evening, everybody. So we still are seeing kind of the similar trends. It's groups of juveniles, younger individuals that are committing the carjackings. We do have a lot of these patterns identified that are touching multiple districts. Some of them are a lot larger than I would like for them to be. But the good part is I think we've identified some very good MOs and characteristics among these cases to start really drawing these connections and hopefully be able to close a large number of these carjackings and bring some of these individuals to justice.
Thank you. So, a couple things. Are there tips that we can put out to the public or ways for them to prevent themselves or make them less likely to be a victim, first of all? And second, what are some other things that we can do on the other end? And actually, I have a question for Director Martin in a second, because I think that we've seen this, especially around Northern Northwest with the Jinx Boys and some other folks, and we've been seeing it consistently for a few years, so we haven't been able to break through the pattern and make the arrest that we need to make. But also, we haven't gotten the information out to the public in a way that people are understanding and studying it as well.
Yes, I think the two biggest crime prevention measures that we could do for this are just for individuals to be, citizens to be aware of their surroundings. We are seeing some of these carjackings, our individuals are getting out of or getting into their vehicle, coming from their home. So they're kind of happening in that transition phase of getting into their vehicle. So I think being aware of their surroundings and just, if they see something that looks out of place, maybe waiting, and even calling us if there is something that's standing out to them. I think the second thing is when they're stopped at red lights late at night, Just being aware of their surroundings once again, not putting their window down, and if they're uncomfortable, making a turn and leaving that area. But overall, just the main point I'd like to drive home is just being aware of their surroundings. We also are working to improve the information that we're putting out through our public information office, to disseminate our bolos and still photos and things like that to solicit the public's help, so that way they can also use that information to be aware and have knowledge of the carjackings and robberies in their neighborhoods.
And thank you. And Director Martin, I know that you're still in the back. Just a question, something we talked about before. So we're seeing that there's a 56% increase in juvenile robbery arrests from year to date. And a few years back, your office actually, before you were there, your office actually ran a juvenile robbery diversion program. I think that one of the reasons why we are losing and seeing an increase in that is because that program was killed by the last administration. Are we under consideration of bringing back that program? We know that we have ROCA, we know that we have Safe Streets, but I think that we should have all three. We had 2 out of the 3 before. Are you thinking about bringing that kind of programming back to the city, especially for the young people that we know are the most likely to be continuing? We've seen the data, we had it in 2014, we were able to have the second lowest number of homicides and shootings and robberies or whatever that year. But I think that when we have the totality of not just the police department doing all those things that they're doing and being better and being more efficient of what they're doing, but having the other programs that we know so many have been cut.
Absolutely. So I actually came back to focus on the issues with our youth. And so in that regard, first of all, I took the assessment that was done under the consent decree as it relates to all of the gaps in our system. And we currently are working with CCLP to continue that work. In addition to that, I'm also working with the Family League. They have specific funding from the Governor's Office of Youth and Children to deal with recidivism. So that's another angle. And then lastly, which is the piece that I think is most directly related to this, is just last week I was with Secretary Abed and a lot of his staff, and we were actually in Chicago and looking at new JDAI models. And one of the things that they had there was a very robust response to juvenile diversion that we're looking at. In addition, they had strong cross-sector communication as it relates to the public defender, the state's attorney, the judges, and our law enforcement partners. And so all of those things are things that I'm exploring and that I have specific people in my office working to put together a strategy around that so we can stop being so disparate and working in our silos so that everybody is on the same page. And additionally, one of the things that I noticed when I got back, traditionally DSS has been left completely out of the conversation. I'm having a meeting with Randy next week to talk about how we make sure to include them in our juvenile strategy. So all of that is being taken into consideration.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'm going to shut up for now. After I ask that you in the future get with Director Martin to bring her in so that she can brief the committee, your committee, on what the things, the great work that they're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of my questions were hit on already around carjackings. I just saw Southwest up 96%. Additionally, street robberies up 15%. Just wanted to know what are you seeing in that particular corridor, and what's being done to address those upticks in both violent crime and these other Part 1 crimes. And I guess it's really sort of a broader question after that part of the question is answered, is just when we've seen a tremendous uptick in violent crime citywide, if you could speak to sort of how the department is becoming, or your goal is to become a little bit more nimble when there are these spikes, that, what does that response look like? What does the pattern shift look like within the department when we are seeing, weekends that are just through the roof or weeks that are through the roof? How does that really adjust the strategy? If you could just speak to that after sort of the smaller question around what's happening in Southwest.
Yeah, the Southwest, what we see, we've got an active pattern working in the Southwest that has to do with hacks, which is the illegal taxis. Citizens acting as illegal taxis. They're picking what they think are fares up, and they're taking them to drop them off. When they go to drop them off, they're being robbed. And then what they'll do is they'll hijack their car. They'll basically take that. They'll do another robbery. We had one the other day where they hit 3 or 4 locations all throughout the city because they were taking the car after the hack. The other robbery pattern is down in the Tri-District area. And what we've done with that is we've got the Tri-District unit is there. We've moved our mobile metro unit there. Up in the hack area, back to the hack area, we're doing our mobile metro is going to be working because that's a pattern that's working. Starts right around 10 o'clock at night and goes to about 3 or 4 in the morning. So it's later when a lot of our deployment is winding down, but we're going to move them to a later time frame. I was speaking to the Southwest about it today. They've got another couple other things they're going to do with their patrol officers in that area to try to quash that carjacking pattern.
Thank you, Councilmember. When we see spikes like we see over a weekend or a couple of weekends, we're always making sure that we look at every single thing we're doing. Was the staffing appropriate? Was the deployment appropriate? Was the supervision appropriate? And making sure that we are where we know the crimes are being committed and the officers are actually doing what we're assigning them to do to deter the crime, displace the crime, and then we, of course, do after actions to assess who was in the right place, who was not, how do we know our officers were where they were supposed to be. But it's always anticipating what we know is happening based on crime data and the crime analytics of when and where it's happening to make sure we deploy there. For example, just about all of the high-profile robberies we've heard about that got us a lot of attention in the news over the past couple of weeks are all solved with arrests. Not all of them, but just about all of them are solved with arrests. And they are complex robberies, meaning those perpetrators were committing multiple robberies. And so now it's about making sure we tie all of them together. But that is why it's so critical for us to make sure we have the strong relationship with our state's attorney's office. So when we turn cases over, we know they're strong and we know that they will make it through the entire criminal justice system so justice can be served. But that's a real key component so that so that people are not returning back to the street because there's some flaw, a mistake that was made on the part of the police department. So that's critical that we do that. And then we're making sure that we're putting more supervisory emphasis on making sure the probable cause is correct, reasonable suspicion is correct, the investigative techniques were correct, and all that, so that until we get to the process where we have an analyst and we're meeting with the state's attorney every week on these cases, we are at least doing our due diligence to make sure those cases leave the police department ready to be introduced into the court system. But we're always assessing our deployment strategy and reassessing and then adjusting when needed. So when we know that there's displacement, we adjust day by day and make sure we're looking at where the spikes are occurring, and then we can anticipate and then move more officers and moving administrative. What we're doing every single week now is moving administrative officers who are performing some administrative duties that we haven't yet hired professional staff for, and reducing their work week down to a 3-day work week to put them back into the field over the weekend. And so those are things that we're doing now until such time as we hire more officers and hire more civilians to do that work. And so it's a constant assessment and a constant readjustment of the deployment strategy. The zones themselves don't change, but we adjust to make sure that we can be where we know the crimes are. But then it's really about the accountability metrics to make sure the officers are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we've seen some level of displacement, we've seen some slowing, but it's really too early to tell. It's really a constant assessment day by day and week by week.
Anybody else? Council President?
Yeah, sorry. Colonel, so there have been roughly 664 gun arrests this year, a little more when you include the non-district units. Do we know how many of those individuals who were arrested were what we call VROs?
I can get that. We don't have it. I don't think we have that right now.
Thank you. If you could provide that to the committee, it would be greatly appreciated. And then while we're on the topic of gun arrests, I'm going to try to look through it very quickly. Like I said earlier, We know that it's down citywide. Excuse me. But it seems that only the Southern District and the Southeast have an increase. Everyone else has a decrease. Do you think that's the same thing as we were talking about Northwest? Is the same trend citywide? Is that they're adjusting to what we do, to what we're doing and placing the weapons in a different place?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the good thing is, though, in the last 7 days, it's up 44%. In the last 28 days, it's up 12%. So we're trending in the right direction with the gun arrests.
And I'm sorry if you guys addressed this when I stepped out, Mr. Commissioner, but for the micro zones, I know it's a little early, but are we seeing any displacement? Because one of the things that I've noticed is that recently we've had a lot of incidents that were not in what we call known knowns or traditional areas, and just want to see if that is as a result of action of displacement, or that's a result of, for example, when something typically happens in my neighborhood, it's because they drove there because it's quiet to kill a person, basically.
I think to answer that question anecdotally, we're seeing a little displacement because for every major incident like a shooting or homicide, we're now asking the question, is it in a micro zone? Is it in a known area? Is it a known offender? And some of the answers are coming back, no, it wasn't in a micro zone. It was in an area that was not on our radar, that's usually not affected. I think it's anecdotal, and I think I would let our crime analyst and our data expert come back to you and tell you with more certainty and scientific, some scientific validity of what that really is. I don't want anything beyond the anecdotal questions we ask every day, whether or not it's in a micro zone or it's in a negatively impacted area. So we know the answers we get, but I want to come back with some validity to it to be able to answer affirmatively yes or no.
And then the last thing that I'll ask is that I think that we, with the microzones and other things, we're making the strides to be where we know we need to be. But I think I know the answer, but just want to see what you think is how we're going to be able to better respond to those non-quote-unquote crime is not acceptable anyway, but non-traditional areas where we're seeing carjackings, shootings, etc. Because we know, in my opinion, that's also a result of the inability to have proactive policing going on in those areas. But what kind of strides are we making that we've had several incidents, high profile or other, in areas where people's houses are being burglarized, so they're being robbed or carjacked, which also, much like the preservation of life, should be important because those crimes are very important to those people.
Absolutely. It's about the accurate supervision and accurate management of the deployment. That in the microzone deployment strategy, it's not the whole shift. It's small doses, 15 to 20 minutes in a microzone several times throughout the shift. But we're still working to make sure we keep officers in the rest of the area so no area of the city gets neglected. And there's a patrol strategy as we're answering calls to still make sure we're highly visible in areas that are not negatively impacted so that the displacement doesn't turn them into an area that becomes negatively impacted. So that's a concern. That's a concern both with staffing and deployment and with supervision and accountability. All that drives that.
Sorry, I had one more quick question for Inspector Worley. I know during the ransomware attack there were issues with the CAD system and the ability to monitor sort of the padlocking process and building cases. Where are we with that? Because I know we had talked about a few locations in the Southwest potentially, but I know that there were some technology issues. Are you still dealing with those issues? Are we in the clear? If so, I can talk to you offline about some stuff I've heard with at least one of those locations.
No, we're still monitoring those locations. I know which ones you're talking about. Yeah, we still heavily monitor those. We go over those every week with the Southwest to see if there's been, and every district, to see if there's been any updates. We meet, we have a call every Thursday at 9 a.m. if necessary, but we update it via email and update the master sheet every day if anything comes up with a business. And as soon as we have an incident that's around the business, one of the first questions I ask is if it's a problematic business, so we can put them on the padlock listing and go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's no other questions. This concludes our public safety hearing on Resolution 18-0092R. Please check the area around your seat to make certain that you have everything that you brought with you.
Thank you.
Committee
Thank you,
stands in
Mr.
recess.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council.